Of people are doing unbelievable things in our country, and sometimes they do it under a blanket, almost undercover.
Theatrical, it depends on how your back is. I used to have trouble with the lower part of my back.
Cliff Richard was one of the biggest stars Britain had ever seen. For decades, he was viewed as the clean-cut icon of music, the man who always smiled, stayed classy, and somehow avoided the chaos that destroyed so many other celebrities. But behind that polished image was a life filled with pressure, loneliness, and eventually, a scandal that nearly shattered everything he spent decades building. What happened next pushed Cliff into one of the darkest periods of his life. Even after trying to move forward, things never fully felt the same again. And now, at 85 years old, unmarried, without children, and quietly dealing with serious health struggles, the legendary star who once ruled the entertainment world is facing a much different reality than fans ever imagined. Most people knew Cliff Richard as Britain's answer to Elvis Presley. He sold over 250 million records, landed 68 singles in the UK top 10, and even received a knighthood from the Queen. For more than 6 decades, his music became part of everyday life across Britain. But while the world saw success and celebration, Cliff privately battled a kind of loneliness few people understood. Cliff Richard was born Harry Webb on October 14, 1940, in British India. His father worked with the Indian Railways, while his mother raised Cliff and his 3 sisters. At first, the family lived fairly comfortably, but everything changed once India gained independence in 1947. Like many British families living there at the time, they suddenly faced an impossible choice: stay behind in a country rapidly changing around them, or leave everything behind and start over in England. They chose to leave. The family packed what little they could carry and boarded the SS Ranchi for a long trip to England. But when they arrived, reality hit hard. Instead of comfort and opportunity, they found themselves squeezed into crowded living conditions in Surrey with relatives. The lifestyle they once knew was completely gone. Eventually, the family moved into a small council house in Hertfordshire, and money became a constant struggle. Cliff later recalled how 3 nights a week, dinner was nothing more than tea and toast with sugar sprinkled on top because that was all the family could afford. Life became about survival, not comfort. Despite the hardship, Cliff worked hard in school and showed talent in sports, especially football. But the thing that truly grabbed his attention was American rock and roll. While his parents thought the music sounded wild and noisy, Cliff became obsessed with it. To him, it felt exciting, rebellious, and completely different from the difficult world around him. When he was 16, his father bought him a guitar, even though he reportedly had doubts about the whole music dream. That single decision changed everything. Cliff eventually left school and worked as a filing clerk at an electrical factory, but deep down, he already knew ordinary life was never going to satisfy him. In 1957, he formed a vocal harmony group called the Quintonies before later joining a skiffle group and finally creating his own band, the Drifters. But even early on, changes were happening fast. At the request of his manager, Harry Webb became Cliff Richard, a name considered more suitable for the growing music scene. His major breakthrough came in 1958 during a recording session at Abbey Road Studios. The original plan was to push a song called Schoolboy Crush as the main single, while another track titled Move It sat quietly on the B-side. But once the recording started, it became obvious which song had the real spark. Move It exploded and reached number 2 on the UK charts, turning Cliff Richard into Britain's first true homegrown rock and roll star. Suddenly, everything changed overnight. Fame, television appearances, screaming fans, hit records, and endless attention followed him everywhere. Over the next several decades, Cliff built one of the most successful careers in British music history. He became one of the few artists to hit the UK singles chart across 6 straight decades. 14 of his songs reached number 1, including multiple Christmas hits that became part of British culture itself. But even with all the success, there were parts of his personal life that never seemed complete. While fans saw confidence and charm, people close to him often described him as deeply private and emotionally guarded. The fame gave him everything except the stable personal happiness many assumed he already had. Then came 2014, the year everything changed. In August of that year, Cliff Richard was relaxing in Portugal when he suddenly turned on the television and saw police officers raiding his home live on national TV. Nobody had warned him beforehand. He reportedly found out at the exact same moment millions of viewers did, watching helicopters circle above his apartment while news channels treated the investigation like a massive breaking scandal. The allegations linked back to an incident reportedly connected to a religious event held in Sheffield back in 1985 at Bramall Lane Stadium during a Billy Graham gathering. Years later, a man came forward accusing Cliff of misconduct. For someone whose entire career depended on a clean public image, the accusation alone carried devastating consequences. At the time, police across Britain were already under huge pressure following the Jimmy Savile scandal and the wider Operation Yewtree investigations. Authorities were aggressively reviewing historical allegations involving famous public figures, and public attention around these cases was extremely intense. Cliff denied the allegation immediately and continued denying it from the very beginning. But despite that, events quickly spiraled out of control behind the scenes. South Yorkshire police decided to search Cliff's apartment in Berkshire in August 2014. Before the raid even happened, BBC journalist Dan Johnson reportedly learned about the investigation. What followed later became one of the most controversial parts of the entire story. According to later court discussions, the BBC and police had an arrangement involving the timing of the coverage. The BBC agreed to temporarily hold the story, while police allegedly provided information about exactly when the search would happen. A retired detective later admitted he felt pressured into cooperating because the broadcaster was reportedly prepared to release the story regardless. From the outside, the whole thing looked explosive. Helicopters hovered above Cliff's property while live footage aired across Britain as though viewers were watching a dangerous criminal operation unfold in real time. For Cliff Richard, the damage to his reputation happened instantly, long before any legal conclusions were reached. On the day of the raid, the entire situation exploded across British television in a way nobody expected. A BBC helicopter was already circling above Cliff Richard's property before police officers even fully entered the home. Millions of viewers watched live as officers searched the apartment of one of Britain's most famous entertainers. Later, human rights lawyer Geoffrey Robertson compared the coverage to the kind usually reserved for dangerous criminals. Meanwhile, Cliff himself was sitting alone in a hotel room in Portugal, completely blindsided by what he was seeing on television. Nobody had warned him. Nobody had called him beforehand. He found out his home was being searched at the exact same time the public did, watching helicopters hover above his property like it was some massive police takedown. The coverage became so controversial that afterward, the BBC even submitted it for a Royal Television Society Scoop of the Year award. Although it did not win, the nomination later became a major issue during the legal battle that followed. For nearly 2 years, the investigation hung over Cliff Richard's life like a dark cloud. He continued denying the allegation from the beginning, and eventually the Crown Prosecution Service reviewed all the evidence. Then on June 16, 2016, the decision finally came down. There was insufficient evidence to bring any charges. Cliff Richard was never arrested. He was never charged with a crime. The investigation ended without any legal case against him. But by then, the damage had already spread around the world. Millions of people had already watched the helicopter footage. Headlines traveled internationally within hours. A reputation Cliff had spent more than 5 decades building suddenly became tied to scandal, despite there being no charges at all. In July 2016, Cliff decided to fight back legally. He filed lawsuits against both South Yorkshire Police and the BBC. What followed became one of the biggest privacy cases involving British media in recent memory. When the High Court hearing finally began in April 2018, disturbing details started coming out about the relationship between the broadcaster and the police. According to testimony presented during the case, there had been communication regarding the timing of the raid coverage, something critics later described as deeply inappropriate. Then came the ruling. On July 18, 2018, Judge Anthony Mann ruled that the BBC had seriously violated Cliff Richard's privacy rights in a sensationalist way, without proper legal justification. South Yorkshire Police were also found liable. The financial penalties were massive. Cliff received £190,000 in general damages from the BBC, plus another £20,000 in aggravated damages linked partly to the Scoop of the Year award submission. South Yorkshire Police had already agreed to pay him £400,000 in a separate settlement. Later, the BBC also covered huge legal costs connected to the case. But money could not erase what happened. During testimony, Cliff revealed the entire ordeal had reportedly cost him around £3.4 million through legal fees, business losses, and the collapse of projects connected to his career. More importantly, he made it clear the emotional damage was far worse than the financial loss. A man who spent decades avoiding controversy suddenly became trapped inside one of the biggest public scandals of his life, despite never facing charges. After the court victory, fans began noticing changes in him. Interviews became rare. Public appearances slowed down. The once ever-present celebrity who had dominated British entertainment for generations slowly started fading from public view. The emotional scars clearly had not healed. Between 2014 and 2016, Cliff later admitted he lived through nearly 2 years of constant anxiety and fear. The pressure did not disappear after a few days of headlines. It dragged on month after month until it completely affected both his physical and mental health. People close to him noticed the changes immediately. He lost a significant amount of weight, not intentionally, but because stress reportedly wrecked his appetite. He also developed shingles, a painful illness often connected to extreme anxiety and exhaustion. In court, Cliff openly admitted there were moments he genuinely feared he might suffer a heart attack or a stroke because of the pressure hanging over him every single day. Even worse, he said he barely recognized himself anymore. At times, he would look in the mirror and feel like an older, broken version of himself was staring back. For someone who had spent decades in front of cameras and audiences, that emotional collapse hit especially hard. Sleep became almost impossible. He reportedly spent nights replaying everything in his head over and over, imagining conversations, worrying about headlines, and thinking constantly about how quickly his reputation had been torn apart. And according to Cliff, the hardest part was knowing he had done nothing wrong while still watching his entire image collapse in public anyway. That feeling reportedly stayed with him everywhere he went. After the raid, he never truly returned to living in the Sunningdale apartment again. In court, he used one specific word to describe the place afterward. He said it felt contaminated. To him, the apartment no longer felt like a home. It felt like the scene of public humiliation. He later returned only to collect his belongings, and even that experience reportedly felt painful. At one point, Cliff compared the experience to being burgled, then admitted it actually felt worse than a burglary. A normal burglary does not happen live on national television while millions of people watch from around the world. The withdrawal from public life that followed was not some publicity strategy, it was survival. The investigation disrupted music projects, album releases, and professional plans, but Cliff said the damage reached far beyond business. He explained that the situation also interfered with his charity work and personal relationships. Wherever he traveled, he reportedly carried the fear that people secretly viewed him as some kind of criminal because of the headlines they had seen. Even after the CPS announced there was not enough evidence to charge him, the feeling never fully disappeared. That became another painful reality of the situation. The announcement clearing him legally never reached everyone who saw the dramatic footage or read the original accusations. Some people had already made up their minds before the investigation even ended. By the late 2010s, Cliff Richard had mostly stepped back from the spotlight. Fame no longer felt comforting. The very attention that once made him one of the biggest stars in Britain had become exhausting and deeply painful. Later, Cliff explained that one reason he fought the case in court was because he believed nobody under investigation should have their identity publicly revealed unless they are formally charged. That belief, shaped directly by his own experience, later became part of wider conversations around privacy rights and media reporting in the UK. But even winning the case did not restore the peace he lost. Those 2 years were gone forever. The emotional damage stayed behind long after the headlines faded. And by the time the legal battle finally ended, many people began looking at another side of Cliff Richard's life that had always remained unusually private. Despite decades of global fame, sold-out arenas, and endless success, Cliff was still living alone, unmarried, and without the kind of personal life many fans simply assumed a superstar like him must have had. Cliff Richard has been famous for nearly 70 years, yet there is one part of life he never experienced. He never got married, never had children, and never built the kind of family life most people assume naturally comes with growing older. After sold-out concerts and screaming crowds, he often returned home to complete silence. And according to Cliff himself, that silence was real. For years, people assumed maybe he simply never found the right person, but Cliff insisted that was not the case at all. He admitted women had shown interest over the years, and he had relationships, but he made a conscious decision not to settle down. At the time, he believed he was perfectly happy with that choice. One major reason was his faith. Cliff became a committed Christian in the mid-1960s, and he viewed marriage as something extremely serious that required total dedication. In his mind, he could not fully give himself to both a marriage and the non-stop lifestyle of touring, recording, and traveling across the world. Music always came first. He openly admitted that he did not want to drag somebody into a life where he was constantly away from home for months at a time. Fame looked glamorous from the outside, but Cliff seemed to understand early on that relationships often struggled under that kind of pressure. Another reason was much simpler. He genuinely enjoyed independence. Cliff explained many times that he liked living alone and valued his personal space. For decades, he insisted he did not feel lonely at all. To him, freedom felt easier and safer than risking heartbreak or divorce later in life. And divorce was something he deeply feared because of his religious beliefs. Cliff reportedly believed it was better not to marry at all than to marry and eventually fail. He once explained that society often acts like marriage is the only path to happiness, but he never fully agreed with that idea. Still, over the years, public curiosity around his personal life never stopped. Because he remained single for so long, endless rumors and speculation followed him everywhere. Cliff repeatedly brushed those conversations aside and said his private life should remain private. He reportedly never understood why strangers were so obsessed with labeling his personal relationships. But despite the mystery surrounding him, there was one woman he openly admitted truly affected him emotionally: Olivia Newton-John. During the 1970s, Cliff revealed that he had fallen in love with the singer and actress while she was becoming one of the biggest stars in the world. But timing got in the way. Olivia was already engaged, and Cliff later admitted he lost the chance. Instead of romance, the two remained extremely close friends for decades. Olivia Newton-John eventually married twice, including a marriage to Bruce Welch, who was also one of Cliff's close friends. Even so, Cliff reportedly stayed close to Olivia throughout her life and was deeply affected by her passing. There were other relationships too. He was romantically linked to Australian dancer Delia Wicks and actress Una Stubbs, and he admitted his love life was far more colorful than many people realized. But none of those relationships ever became permanent. Then there was Sue Barker. The former tennis champion and BBC presenter shared a close bond with Cliff during the height of their fame in the 1970s. Their relationship reportedly carried romantic feelings at different points, but eventually transformed into a lifelong friendship instead of marriage. Sue later married someone else while Cliff continued pouring himself into music and touring. But as the years passed, Cliff slowly began speaking more honestly about the emotional cost of the life he chose. At one point, he publicly admitted something fans had never really heard from him before. He confessed that sometimes he wondered whether he had missed out on a kind of love most people take for granted. Not romance or celebrity relationships, but family life. The everyday comfort of having someone beside you when the spotlight disappears. He described coming home after concerts to complete silence and occasionally wondering what it might have felt like to share ordinary moments with somebody who was simply there at the end of the day. And that confession hit fans hard because it revealed a much more vulnerable side of him than people were used to seeing. Now, at 85 years old, Cliff Richard's life looks very different from the superstar image many people still remember. Despite selling over 250 million records and becoming one of the most recognizable entertainers Britain ever produced, he lives quietly and mostly alone. And sadly, age is finally starting to catch up with him. After more than 6 decades of touring and performing, the physical strain on his body has become impossible to ignore. In late 2024, doctors reportedly discovered prostate cancer during a medical examination connected to tour insurance paperwork. Cliff had not even gone looking for the diagnosis himself. The tests were simply part of routine requirements before traveling. That medical check may have saved his life. Doctors reportedly told him the cancer had been caught early and had not spread. Later, during an appearance on Good Morning Britain in December 2025, Cliff shared that the cancer was gone at the moment. But even then, he spoke carefully and cautiously rather than celebrating too confidently. He admitted nobody could promise the illness would not return. More than anything, the experience seemed to shake him emotionally. Cliff urged viewers to get tested and stop avoiding medical checkups because early detection can completely change outcomes. He sounded less like a celebrity giving advice and more like a man who had suddenly realized how fragile life had become. Fans attending his recent concerts have also noticed major physical changes. During performances in late 2025, audience members reportedly observed that Cliff moved much slower across the stage than he once did, and his speaking voice sounded weaker and more fragile. But strangely, when he sings, the old Cliff still appears. Many fans said his singing voice remains remarkably strong despite his age and health battles. It is almost like the moment the music starts, decades disappear for a little while. Cliff has also made an interesting distinction between retiring and stopping. To most people, those words mean the same thing, but not to him. Retirement feels permanent in his mind, like shutting a door forever. Stopping, however, sounds temporary. It leaves the possibility open that he could still return to the stage whenever he feels ready. And honestly, that mindset may be one reason he keeps going. Even now, Cliff refuses to officially announce a farewell. When reporters asked whether recent tours would be his last, he admitted he genuinely does not know anymore. He understands age is making performing harder, especially the endless traveling, hotels, flights, and exhausting schedules. He admitted touring now takes far more out of him physically than it once did. Every flight feels heavier. Every long trip drains more energy. And perhaps most frightening for a singer, age has introduced uncertainty into his voice, something he reportedly never worried about during his younger years. Still, the excitement for performing has never disappeared. Cliff completed his Can't Stop Me Now tour at London's Royal Albert Hall in December 2025, and the title carried a deeper meaning than many fans realized. It was not just about confidence or defiance. It reflected the reality of a man who had survived scandals, lawsuits, health scares, public humiliation, and aging itself, yet still refused to fully step away. Because for Cliff Richard, the stage is more than a job now. It is the last place where the legend still fully feels alive. The streaming generation may have moved on, and younger audiences may barely understand how massive he once was, but live performances still allow him to reconnect with the identity he carried for decades. Today, the mystery surrounding Cliff Richard is mostly gone. What remains is something far more human. An aging music icon living quietly, carrying regrets he rarely speaks about openly, still stepping onto stages while his body allows it, and facing the difficult reality that time eventually catches everyone. Even the stars who once seemed untouchable,